Hi, I am Fabian Ricardo Salazar. This video is for the English literature class, and I want to share with you an analysis of the novel The Last of the Mohicans by James Fenimore Cooper. Throughout this video, I will talk about this novel. I will take into account aspects such as the contextual, semantic, and linguistic framework, which will help us to understand it a little bit more and go beyond the literal meaning. Let's start with the contextual framework. As I told you before, this novel was written by James Fenimore Cooper, who was a prolific and popular American writer of the early 19th century. His historical romances of frontier and Indian life in the early American days created a unique form of American literature. He is considered the father of the American novel because he created the first American adventure story, The Last of the Mohicans, 1826, as well as the first American novel of manner, Precaution, and the first American novel of the sea, The Pilot. As a result, Cooper became the first successful American novelist. The Last of the Mohicans introduces Cooper's most well-known character, Natty Bumppo. This is an abduction narrative and follows the adventure of Bumppo and his two Mohican Indian companions, father and son, Chingawuk and Uncas. They set out to free Monroe's two daughters, Cora and Alice, from repeated kidnapping by a group of Huron Indians led by their chief, Magua. Now, I'll make a brief literary presentation of the text. The Last of the Mohicans belonged to the American Romantic movement, which emerged from the United States as an embodiment of the American spirit after a second war with Britain. The Last of the Mohicans takes place during the French and Indian War of the 1750s. During the war, the French and English fought over who would control the colonies, and the French allied themselves with some American Indian nations, sometimes with bloody and disastrous results. The genre of this masterpiece is historical novel. The novel is set in the location and time of a famous decisive or dramatic event or movement in history. In this case, the French and Indian War that led to the American Revolution about 20 years later. Also, this masterpiece is historical romance, usually the same, but romance often means that the plot is more adventurous and amorous, and that the historical reality fades in importance relative to the fictional adventure. This masterpiece is intended for young readers since it is a tale of adventures and romance which captures the attention of younger people. This time I'm going to talk about the context at that age. I'm going to start with the socio-economical context in the 19th century. It was marked by two important facts. The first one was market revolution in the United States that was a drastic change in how manual labor was conducted. This development was marked by improvements in how goods were processed and fabricated, as well as by a transformation of how labor was organized to process trade goods for consumption. Traditional commerce was made obsolete by improvements in transportation and communication. The second one was the American society urbanized. The years of industrial expansion after the Civil War brought significant changes to American society. The country became increasingly urban and cities grew not only in terms of population but also in size, with skyscrapers pushing cities outward and new transportation systems extending them outward. Part of the urban population growth was fueled by an unprecedented mass immigration to the United States that continued unabated into the first 2 decades of the 20th century. About the literary context, we can say that during the 1820s, writers and critics called for nationalistic literature to reflect the new sense of cultural independence from Britain. Authors in the 1820s shared a sense of the distinctiveness of the American landscape, its colonial history, and the legitimacy of its traditions, and worked to represent the ways that ordinary Americans were coming to grips with their country's contradictions. Now, historical and political context in America was marked by two important facts. The first one was the pre-Civil War. During the early 19th century, and especially after the War of 1812, American society was profoundly transformed. This year witnessed rapid economic territorial expansion, the extension of democratic politics, the spread of evangelical revivalism, the rise of the nation's first labor and reform movements, the growth of cities and industrial ways of life, radical shifts in the roles and status of women, and deepening sectional conflicts that would bring the country to the verge of civil war. The second one was the Indian removal. As the 19th century began, land-hungry Americans poured into the bad country of the coastal south and began moving toward and into what would later become the states of Alabama and Mississippi. Since Indian tribes living there appeared to be the main obstacle to westward expansion, white settlers petitioned the federal government to remove them. Although President Thomas Jefferson and James Monroe argued that the Indian tribes in the southeast should exchange their land for lands west of the Mississippi River, they did not take steps to make this happen. Indeed, the first major transfer of land occurred only as the result of war. The religious context, it was marked by the Second Great Awakening, that was a Protestant revival movement during the early 19th century in the United States. Religious revivals swept through the United States during the early decades of the 19th century. They were partly a reaction against the rationalism that was the belief in human reason that had been the fashion during the Enlightenment and the American Revolution. The Second Great Awakening marked a fundamental transition in American religious life. Many early American religious groups in the Calvinist tradition had emphasized the deep depravity of human beings and believed that they could only be saved through the grace of God. Let's move on to semantic framework. I really found this book very interesting. Not the whole book itself, but each chapter catches you in the way that you don't want to stop reading because of the battle, heroism, romances, journeys, kidnappings, rescues, escapes, massacres, and sacrifices. This book is highly thrilling. I really get interested in every single character and facts they went through. Besides, I like the way Cooper showed through the book the hard life of the Native American who had to live the conflict of the colonial period. On the other hand, Mark Twain, in his essay, Fenimore Cooper's Literary Offenses, complained that Cooper lacked a variety of style and was overly wordy. I think Cooper just tried to give many details in order to make more interesting the masterpiece and make readers get involved in the story and can feel what they wanted to transmit. Throughout the book, we can find many things which make the tale more interesting, such as interracial love and friendship. The Last of the Mohicans is a novel about race and the difficulty of overcoming racial divides. Cooper lauded the genuine and long-time friendship between Hawkeye, a white man, and Chingawuk, a Mohican Indian. Hawkeye and Chingawuk's shared communion with nature transcends race, enabling them to team up against Huron enemies and to save white military leaders like Hayward. Another theme is the role of religion in the wilderness. The character David Gamut allows Cooper to explore the relevance of religion in the wilderness. We know Gamut is a Calvinist because he talks about predestination, the idea that God has a plan for each person and no amount of human effort can change that plan. Another theme is loyalty and treachery. The Last of the Mohicans is a meditation on the nature of loyalty, what it means to be loyal or disloyal, and the consequences of loyalty and treachery as played out in battle. About the style, Cooper's style is a simple one. He uses the figurative language of simile and metaphor sparingly so that his exposition and description are usually factual and straightforward. The tone it is ornate, solemn, and sentimental tone. Finally, I'm going to talk about the linguistic framework. The novel was written in third person. The narrator follows the action of several characters at once, especially during combat scenes. He describes characters objectively, but periodically makes reference to his own writing. About the figurative species, I can say that in The Last of the Mohicans, Cooper used metaphors and similes in order to allow the reader to go beyond the literal meaning of the story. I really recommend this book to all these people who love tales of adventures and romances.